Settle yourself down.
Leonard's comfortable with all this. I'm not, but he is. He loves it.
Well, it's good to see you guys back from the grave after seeing that.
Oh!
Thanks very much.
The one thing that Romeo and Juliet has to have happen... What's that? The one thing that Romeo and Juliet has to have happen for it to work is to believe that Romeo and Juliet are in love. Can you talk a little bit about maybe how you first met and how you developed a relationship of Romeo and Juliet?
Actually, we met at 66 Dean Street, do you remember? And Franco paired herself together right from the get-go.
That's right.
We didn't do it with anyone else. He paired other people and swapped and changed them. But he said, you and you, Leonard, Olivia, you two together.
Wow.
So that was good.
I'd like to say one thing which is really interesting, because we actually worked when we were very young. And I worked in a theatre called the Albury Theatre, or the New Theatre, and Olivia worked in the Wyndhams. And I played the lead as the Artful Dodger in Oliver, and she was one of the girls in The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie.
One of the lead girls.
One of the leads. So we actually worked almost together because there was just like a little street that separated our theatres. And then when Franco saw us together, he thought, darling, they look wonderful together, you know, and that's what they decided to do.
Now let's just see if they can act.
It's very challenging roles, but you'd actually worked. You'd been with Redgrave on stage, so you had come from stage work and weren't really new to act. But was it were you scared to death by doing this, as being cast as Romeo and Juliet in a huge film, or were you go into it very subtly?
It was all very exciting, as I remember. There were 800 girls and boys in London, and we all got to share. He had the Capulet jacket, the Montague jacket on, and I had this white dress, and when we were finished, we'd have to undress and give the dress to the next girl and the thing to the next boy. And it didn't really hit us how big it was. It started out to be a 3-week television special for the BBC in London, the first colour special. And then Paramount heard about it, and it became, the response was unbelievable. And so before we knew it, it was this big Paramount picture. So it was very overwhelming.
I was excited when I saw it for the first time, actually.
Oh.
So beautiful.
You weren't so bad, you know.
Thank you.
And we went to Tottenham Court Road. I just remembered this. We went to Tottenham Court Road together when we were first cast and weren't allowed to tell anyone. And we sat alone and we watched The Taming of the Shrew with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Alone. Do you remember that?
Very much. Yeah, what a beautiful movie.
It was a matinee, and we were both like, "Oh, we're going to be doing that with him." And it was like it was overwhelming, very exciting. It was wonderful.
I remember the first time I saw him. He came in, and I wanted to make a good impression because I'd actually realised that this was going to be quite big. And I said, "Hello, Mr. Zeffirelli, I heard that you do lots of opera-like, and what I thought would be really nice is that if we get on very well and everything." And he said, "Stop." And he turned to one of his assistants and said, "How can he speak Shakespeare's beautiful iambic pentameter when he can't even speak English?" So, because, I mean, my accent, I don't know, you guys probably know, but in London we have people called Cockneys, and they've got this very sort of strange way of talking. And that's the kind of people that I was from, so that's the way I was talking to Franco. So what he did, he took me and he sent me to stay with a wonderful actor's family called Anthony Nichols, and I stayed there for about 6 months to learn how to speak proper, and then... which sort of worked, and then after that, it was straight from the projects straight into the Savoy Hotel, so we felt no pain. And
But then he put us with Jean Scott, and we worked with Jean Scott 4 hours a day. Do you remember that sweet old lady?
Oh, I remember her.
And
Yes,
she had
she
to
was
get rid
funny.
of your Cockney accent and my Argentinian tilt. So we worked really hard before we ever got to Italy. We were doing. I was at Wyndham Theatre doing Brodie, so I'd work in the afternoon for 4 hours with Jean, and then run over to Wyndham's to do that. So.
What were looking back? What were the most challenging scenes for you, and what do you look most fondly on? Which scenes and set pieces that you got to be in Rome?
I kind of think that the fight scenes were pretty
It
good.
would have been the bedroom scene. I mean, really?
Well, I complained at the time because we didn't rehearse that half enough, you know.
He
It's
was
not too late.
strutting around the set, not shy at all.
Sorry, David, but it's not too late.
I'm joking.
But
But I'm
what
not.
was nice, actually, when Olivia was working so hard, I was then the youngest member of the National Theatre when Laurence Olivier ran the company. And we did something called Love for Love, which is an old Congreve play. Am I allowed to tell you a few of the people in the cast? Yeah, okay. Laurence Olivier, Michael Gambon, Albert Finney, Lynn Redgrave, John Stride, Bobby Lang, Christopher Timothy, and quite a few others. Anyway, we did this wonderful play, and I was the singer then because I actually started off in the business as a musician. And I was the singer, and we actually went on massive tours around Europe and also Russia, etc., etc. And it was from there that I got the part of Romeo in this movie and met my little baby, yeah.
You mentioned the fight scene. I'd love to talk to you about that because it's one of the greatest fight scenes ever between Romeo and Tybalt, and it's like a street brawl, and you're so controlled, out of control. Can you talk a little bit about the choreography of that? Because it's really, it feels like it's someone just got in a big street fight, but it's rapier and dagger. How did that go about?
I think that's what Franco wanted to do. So he put us with this guy who was the Maestro della Spada or whatever in Rome, who told us how to fight. And it's all very choreographed. It's actually not that difficult. I mean, it's all basically the same as karate moves. It's like horizontal and this and this and this. But it's putting it all together and remembering it, which is the real problem. And it was about 37 movements, I think. So we had to do this wide shot, and we got up to the 36th, 37th, and I looked at Michael, and Michael looked at me, and I sort of said under my voice or under my breath, "We're all out of moves now. What are we going to do?" So he went. So I turned around and looked at Franco, who was sort of, you know, with his blue glasses. And I said, "Michael, what should we do?" I said, "Well, let's try." Anyway, we tried without choreographing it, and we both ended up with terribly, terribly cut hands and dripping with blood and stuff. But we liked it because we thought that it was, as you said, almost like a street brawl, and I think that worked nicely. But how about when he meets Madam for the first time? It's beautiful, huh? Yeah, it's nice.
What, you mean the ball scene, right?
You know what I mean. It was nice.
Actually, we shot that twice, the ball scene.
Did
First
we?
meeting, yes. Don't you remember? The first time was outside where there was the balcony, and we were shooting in the middle of the night, and we thought, thank God that's done when it was over. And then 2 weeks later, Franco showed up and said, "Darling, I have to talk to you." And we thought, oh no. And he said, "You know, it just had, we have to do it again. And we're going to do it inside with music." And we shot it twice. But then I'm glad he changed his mind, because inside with the music and the singing and the smoke, tons of smoke, green smoke, which was terrible. No, it was terrible. It had, you know, we all had bronchitis from it. And yeah.
They actually wanted me to sing that song, What Is a
did sing
Youth?
it.
Well, it wasn't me in the movie, though.
No, I know. Yours
no.
was better, actually.
Thank you. She's always had such fantastic taste. That's one of the reasons I love her so much, you know.
Do you have any fond stories about working with Franco Zeffirelli from this that you would like to share? Any?
Franco is one of a kind. He's absolutely genius, and sometimes he's very moody. He's hell to work with, but when you've finished working with him, there's nobody else that you can ever work with, at least for me, that makes you feel alive like that. Genius, you know. 1 minute he's standing on the backdrop painting something that he sees is not working. The next minute he's like ripping your costume apart in front of everyone, saying, "This isn't it's not working, cazzo!" You know, he's like he was genius.
That was naughty.
Genius. But always full of life and very lovable. Right?
Absolutely. The interesting thing is that if you said to him, what film director has inspired you the most? He wouldn't say Pasolini or Antonioni or Vittorio De Sica or any of those people. He'd actually equate himself as being probably of the same kind of tradition as the great Renaissance paintings of Italy in the Seicento, you know, because he considers himself, I think for Franco, there was a wonderful thing that Keats said, which was, beauty is truth, truth is beauty. On this world, you really need to know nothing else. And Franco's not worried or shy about projecting something that is beautiful for the sake of being beautiful. And I think that was one of the inspirations that he had behind this movie. And also the really weird thing was that, you know, it was the same time that things were changing, especially in this country, you know, the 60s and the peace and love and all that kind of stuff. And we actually, in a way, became sort of icons of the time. Madam looking beautiful with her very, very long hair, and me sort of sniggering on behind, I suppose. And it was really quite an experience. I don't think that we could have actually matched this experience with anything else, could we?
No.
Isn't she
It was
gorgeous?
a perfect moment in time with a perfect cast. Everybody was cast perfectly. You know, Franco being that kind of director, he never over-directed. He figured, well, I've cast the perfect person to do their job. I'm going to let them do their job. He said, darling, do whatever you feel. You know where the camera is, and I'll steer you if I see something that isn't working.
Because there's so many interesting takes on these characters that it's different from Mercutio and everyone in here. They're doing things I haven't seen other people do in Romeo and Juliet, and the same with both of your characters. Now, did that come from your choice of what you were doing, and he was just guiding it, or did he come in with certain ways that he wanted?
It was different in every scene, really. I mean, some scenes went very quickly. The first scene I had to do was a scene when I went down to the tomb and saw, what was his name? He was Lord Paris. And it was her first, so I was upstairs full of, it was my first scene in the film, you know, and I thought she would be winded from running so much. So I was running outside the church like a lunatic in this big green dress, and it was hot,
was that when you came down and
Yes.
Milo was
and then
there?
I came running down the no, Milo, I didn't get to Milo yet. It was right before Milo.
You did it beautifully, darling.
And I came running down and Franco said, okay, are you ready? I said, yes, hurry up, you know, like, because I was 15, you know. And I running down the stairs, and I came down, and I did it because he wanted to tell me what she would be feeling. I said, I know what I'm feeling, just let me do it, and then if you don't like it, I'll do it again. And I did it, and it just came naturally, and then it was like silence, and it was cut, print, one take Hussey, we're going to have to call her now. Which wasn't true. I did lots of takes on other stuff, but that was my first thing. He was wonderful to work with. It's just such a joy.
But also, you know, one of the things that I don't know if you can remember, that sometimes when you'd say you were really, really puzzled about how to do a scene, he is such a lovely, lovely actor himself. I mean, he could do whatever you wanted to ask him to do and do it probably better than oneself. And that was good.
Very hammy, though.
Do you think?
Yeah, he overacted, but then you took what he did and you said, oh, I could do that, but tone it down a bit.
Absolutely, it was
He was
very
always-
inspiring.
Especially when he knew the photographers were around, which they always were.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was like unbelievable.
As my mum would have said, not backward at coming forward.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
that's
loved
right,
his
yeah.
mom. She was wonderful.
This is going to sound crazy, but it's a great screenplay, which obviously it's Shakespeare, but what he did with it,
He cut out a lot.
Rosalind and Paris are cut out.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, was any of that filmed? Was the fight scene with Paris filmed, or any of the things that he cut?
That's very interesting. Didn't you know this?
No.
Well, what happened was we actually did film the Paris scene, and Franco said to me at the end of the movie, he said, I've got good news to tell you and I've got bad
That
news.
was always so.
So I said, what's the good news? So he said, the good news is that the scene with Paris is the best thing you acted in the whole of the movie. I said, oh, that's good. What's the bad news? The bad news is we cut it out. So I said, well, why have you done that? He said, because the film was running too long. But there was
That
very...
was his excuse. Huh?
Was it?
Yeah,
He didn't use the same excuse
The whole
with
point
you.
was, he said, I know I'm going to annoy all the English Shakespearean buffs. And he said, but we've got to get rid of a lot of stuff because the whole point is to get across the passion. You know, so that 50 years from now, young people can see it and still feel the same passion. He said, they don't want to be bogged down with a ton of dialogue. And let's keep it alive and make it young.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, so he said, that's got to go. That's got to go, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot in the reviews and things, it was panned, you know, in London when it opened.
But he's right.
I don't think I was.
But he
was
was
I?
right. What?
I don't think I was.
No, darling, never. You know, they just said we did the best job we could do, but he slaughtered Shakespeare and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, it's still, people still love it.
Yep.
It's shown in high schools all over the world.
Yes, it is.
We get like fan mail from 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds. So it's doing it did something right.
Well, I write to you and you write to me.
It's still the last Shakespeare film to be nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. It's also nice business because you get to meet some really extraordinary people. And Milo O'Shea was such a darling, sweet, lovely man. You know, he could walk into any room and he just would make the whole place just shine with his magic and sweetness. And that was terribly sad. He passed away, a couple of years ago. Do you remember when we were at his house on the beach? He says, my God, they're going to kill me for killing both of them.
Yeah. Never mind.
Sorry,
I never
David,
know what's
this
going
was
to come
all
out of
very
his mouth. So we've known each other a long time.
Yeah. Sorry, dear.
How was working with Pat Haywood?
I have to tell you, Milo O'Shea was shooting Barbarella at the same time. So he was a monk in the afternoon, and then he said, oh God, I've got to get over to the other set. And then he'd run over to be with Jane Fonda and Roger Vadim. It's very funny, back and forth, which was incredible. You know?
It's a good day.
Yeah, he kept us both really calm, and he was just so easygoing. He was wonderful.
He was such a
That
delight.
marriage scene, remember? Because the marriage scene turned out they were doing, what was it? Cyril, you know that Us Against the World thing? It was the first televised worldwide thing. The Beatles were on it. And it was the first time that they ever managed to do it worldwide. And we followed the
International
Beatles.
broadcasting, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
You know, and Milo kept us calm, and they did our wedding scene before we'd even shot it. And of course, Franco said, "You got to do it, darling. It's going to be wonderful." And he was right in there directing us, and we were looking at him like, "We already know what we're doing. Thank you, Franco." You know, but it was. That's what we did. We did live for the world.
Wow.
If I may say, I think also with what Olivia's saying is important. You know, the thing is that anybody who's involved in the media has got a tremendous sense of responsibility that they have to act out, because in this particular world now where so many elements of entertainment lead kids especially to like the dark side and things that are really not full of life and love and everything, I think that I'm proud, and I know that Olivia's proud to be part of something that was full of life and positive energy, and if you like, it's a bit corny I suppose, but goodness. And I wish more people would go out of their way to make that kind of movie again. I mean it. Thank you. I mean it.
I would just mention Pat Haywood as well. With
She was lovely.
Yeah.
Very professional. What's really funny is Pat was really young when she did that film. And I saw her in something recently. She hasn't aged at all. She looked older when she was young, but she's never like age. She always looks a fantastic actress.
Happens to a lot of us, darling.
So we were watching the two of you earlier off the BFI clip, the earlier interview. One, do you remember that interview at all?
We did so many interviews, and they said, you know, Olivia, you have this image now. You've got to be like Juliet, and the hair's got to flow. And so I put my hair up in a ponytail immediately. I was a little rebel, and you know. And then I lit my cigarette, which they all went behind the camera. You could see Paramount and going, you know. And then Leonard's like sipping something with something in it, you know, because he was 17 and I was 16 by that time. And I felt fat that day, and I didn't feel like doing that interview. I can't believe it showed up again. Everything shows up now. Stuff like, oh my God, I can't remember that. It's really strange, you know, because on the internet now, it's it's a runaway train, and basically we see our whole lives before us. It's unbelievable. Can be quite depressing if you let it be.
How was it coming?
It's not. It's fun.
Entering into all that fame when it got that big.
It was frightening.
Frightening.
Leonard was better at it than I was, but I've always suffered from agoraphobia, believe it or not. So this, to me, is like nightmare time. But I'm trying to get over the ego thing, and the meditation helps.
I think you're doing pretty good, darling, don't
Yeah,
you?
I'm trying, you know. But it's a constant thing. I've had it all my life, you know. I loved working on the set. I loved everything. And then they say, for lunch, you and Leonard have to have lunch with this photographer, and then this interviewer, and then the other one. We've got to fit at least 4 in the hour. And we both go, you know, because we had no privacy at all. We had paparazzi following us in the streets, and it was hard for people that were shy and young.
It was kind of weird, and people, we had, my then wife, had people actually sleeping outside my flat in London, in the garden.
That was after Romeo and Juliet. You married after.
I don't remember.
I remember, Leonard. You're always such a flirt.
I try. Unusual, huh?
How was it in those sets? I imagine they were so echoey and there's so much depth to them. Did you have to loop lines later because of them?
I think we looped almost the whole film.
Okay.
We
Except
did
for
the
one
whole
little
film.
section.
Yeah.
And then when we got there, Franco called us to Rome, and, you know, we did like, God, months on end of this looping thing, and we'd never done it. I'd never done it before.
I love it.
And Franco said, darling, I know how you felt in this scene, and I know what you were trying to do, but I want to change the whole thing. That's what he was like.
Wow.
I said, what do you mean, Franco? You want to well, the inflections, the feeling, it's all just wrong. It's wrong. So then we'd have to, like, it was hard work, you know. And then he used an Arriflex camera, especially on the balcony. And so the noise, we had to loop all of that except for one little section. Wow. You know, and it was like, and it was absolute hell. It was the only time one day I got so angry that he had said, you're not very good at this, you know, because he pushed, you know, all the time, but it was wonderful. And I didn't realize it at the time. And when he'd finished, you're not very good at this. And by the time I'd finished the film, I went to do another film, and they said, you've got, like 122 loops to do. And I said, I'm really bad at it, and I got really nervous. I went in there, and I did it in like an hour and 20 minutes, and they couldn't believe it. That's because Franco had shown me, how to do it. He was really good.
It was quite amusing, actually, because on the balcony scene, they found this old English sound man who was one of those guys, whenever you said something, the first thing he did was... Yeah.
That's right.
And do you remember him? And it got to Franco was so excited about making the whole thing, and it got to about 5:30 in the morning. And when they said turn over, Giuliano, but from the cameraman's point of view, he had to say partita, which means, the sound's running. And in the end, he was going like something out of Monty Python's Flying Circus, partita! Because he thought that all the technicians were being worked a little too hard, It was funny.
Were always complaining, weren't they?
Yeah, I think probably they were.
The sound, the English sound is like the best in the world, I think. No, there's a lot of good people everywhere, but Franco always used English sound people.
But how about the cinematography? Pasqualino de Santis.
Pasqualino de Santis was a
Grazie
miracle.
mille,
He was fantastic.
Come
Because Franco
bravo,
would yell and say,
lui.
not good enough, kids, not good enough. Go back, start again, And then we'd look at Pasqua and he'd go. Because it was Franco trying to push for the best. Oh, and when I was looping, and he made me so angry one day, and he just said, this is just not good enough. And I turned around and I said, Franco, I really hate you. And I walked out to the bathroom only. And I walked out, and afterwards someone told me he cried. He got so hurt and so upset. I said, good, now I know how to get to him. Because he's the same, Even I saw him a few years ago when I did Teresa in Rome, and he came out with his walker, and people who's always with him, he said, and Franco had like this evil look on his face, and people said, look, he's waiting for something bitchy to tell you. But with love, he was one of a kind, just...
Well, I remember the first day I got on the set, he said, he pointed to Pasqualino to me and he said, "See that man over there, darling?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Make him the greatest friend in the world that you've ever had, because he's going to make you look even more beautiful." So I said, "Okay." Mm.
And he did.
Yeah.
Question right there.
There's so many good ones. Oh,
Talking about the score of the film.
Nino Rota was this very sweet little old man, and you went to his house and he had like garlic cloves hanging everywhere, and and I remember we were in Bagno Vignone, and Nino came up to see, and he just said he saw a little bit, and he would walk like that, and Franco was saying it's got to be for the theme of the film. They were discussing it, and for the theme of the film, it's got to be something passionate but haunting, and and Nino listened and listened, and then he just sat down at the piano and he played the first few notes. Da, 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 that. And Franco said, "That's it." And that was the beginning of that one.
How about that for a genius?
When we were doing the Moresca in the ballroom scene, Franco loved that music, and they couldn't find out who the music belonged to, and they were trying to get permission. So they had Paramount scouting, they had people in Rome scouting. Nobody could remember, and they said, "We've got to use that Moresca music." And it turned out that Nino Rota had written it when he was young and forgotten about it. I just remembered that. And he said, "No problem, it's Nino's." And that's something. Nino Rota was wonderful.
He had the
Wonderful.
tiniest hands of any man
Yeah.
I've ever seen in my
He
life.
was
I mean,
all
how he
sweet.
could do an octave, and I don't know. Incredible.
Simple and sweet and loving. And
When I was supposed to be singing the main song, I had to go over his house in Trastevere in Rome to go over the music. And I went into his house and everything, and as I walked past, I just put my finger on the organ that he had there, and he said, "Leonardo, play me something on the piano." So I said, "I don't play the piano, maestro." He says, "Everybody plays the piano," which I thought was very sweet. He said, "I've got something very, very important to tell you." I said, "Yes, what is it?" He said, "Come here." I said, "Yes." He said, "I live above the best ice cream shop in the world." He was such a sweet man. But if you think of all the stuff he wrote, I mean, what Godfather,
God.
Love Story, Romeo and Juliet, what? La Strada, that's right, yes. Didn't hear that one. Oh yeah, did he do 8.5 and all those? La Dolce Vita. I mean, but isn't it extraordinary how somebody can have such genius? And I mean,
be so sweet.
yeah, absolutely. I think he only worked to pay for his conservatoire, which was on the coast in Italy somewhere, where he loved to teach the students. Anyway, are you still awake?
Right there.
And then there was Danilo Donati, the costume designer. He was very clever. And Danilo was this chubby little man. If he was going to be cast as anything, he'd be the penguin. He was a doll.
Yeah, right, yeah, absolutely.
He was a doll, and he'd come in, and he was always like, "Dove Franco? Dove Franco?" He'd be like looking for Franco always, and he'd have a big tray of sweets, which was always my downfall, And I'd be looking and thinking, "Oh shit, I can't eat any of them. I can't have pasta." Franco's got me nibbling on like just some salad, and everybody else is eating this. And Danilo would come in with all these big desserts, and that was Danilo always feeding everybody.
Did you both do a film together recently? Did I read that?
Oh.
We sort of did, didn't we?
Yes, it was a little independent film that hasn't done anything yet. And it was just, what it was they wanted my daughter to play the Juliet character, but it wasn't Romeo and Juliet. It was loosely based on feuding families and things. And the lady had actually called to ask if I could play the mother. And I said, "Well, I'm not going to travel to England to work for a day, unless it's something." And I said, "Have you cast Julia?" And she said, "No, as a matter of fact, we're still looking." I said, "You might want to look into my daughter, who's acting now." And she said, "Well, I don't think India would be interested in this." And I said, "I think she'd love it. It's a lovely little script, and it's, you know, and if she does it, I'll play the mom. And in fact, I'll get Leonard to play the dad. Right? Well,
Before we let you go, what advice would you, either one of you, give to young lovers?
have fun.
That's good.
Get right down to it. You know, have fun.
Which reminds me, on the original story that was based on, I think, Boccaccio's story, it's quite amusing actually, because what happened when Romeo actually saw her on the balcony, etc., when he jumped up the tree to see her, when he was actually close to her, he thought, sod all this, I think I'll nip over the top now, and they actually had a sort of, I don't know how I can put this politely, but a culmination of their desire right then and there on the other side of the balcony, which is slightly different from Shakespeare's thing. So if you do that, be careful, guys, won't you?
Well, I think that's a good note to end this. Thank you so much. The first ever happy ending to Romeo and Juliet
So
tonight.
happy
Thank
to
you,
have
guys.
met you guys. Thank you.